I work for the College of William and Mary. We're down in Williamsburg, Virginia, about 2 hours away from here, if you haven't heard of it. It's kind of a weird title. So the first thing probably to do is to define what I mean by heterogeneous. In the case of us, we run a lot of different things. We run stuff on VMs, bare metal, different operating systems, different baseline configurations, and there's a lot of variance in what we can reasonably manage. We work for Highroad. In Highroad, we've got systems that some things can run all over the place. Some things we've got to be very particular. The vendor likes to do the support, and when the vendor likes to do the support, they don't like us to manage a whole lot because it steps on their toes. Other cases, we can manage everything. We can do the traditional Puppet, everything from absolutely nothing all the way to a running system like we like really quickly and easily. So now that we've got that part out of the way, hopefully that solves some of the weird, what's this title actually mean question. Tell you a little bit about me. I'm a systems engineer. Operations, and I guess the title varies. So I'm at College of William and Mary. I've been puppeting for about 3 years now. Now, William and Mary, this will fit in here in just a little bit. We don't have a big online education component quite yet. We're still very traditional liberal arts in the classroom, small classes. We're a relatively small school, but we've had a little bit of influence mainly around DC. Some of our alums, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, John Stewart, all through William and Mary. So I know James asked some of these questions earlier, but I am a little bit curious just to know, and I was sitting kind of in a weird spot to see everybody. How many here who is using Puppet, like in production? Okay. How many of you write modules? Okay. And then just because I'm in higher ed, we always have to ask this question because it's just what we do for some reason. How many of you guys work for higher ed, even in research roles? Okay, not a whole lot. Just curious because I know you guys probably feel some of our pain in certain places. This is more for people reading the presentation online. If you want to fall asleep, this is what I'm going to get to. So like I talked about, I'm in higher ed. So IT supports our main product. It is not our main product. And I know a lot of you are probably in a similar situation. So it's kind of hard to know, what's going on. Sometimes we're not thought of as early in the process as we probably should be, which makes things get a little bit hairy, and then we scramble and everything else, and it's probably going on in all industries. So we have a lot of in-house stuff. We have a lot of vendor things. Like I said earlier, some of our vendors are particularly picky about where things go. We also have a lot of faculty ranging from physics applied science, where they know what they're doing. They just want to get in and they want to just give me a server, let me manage it. We also have faculty that have really never touched a computer before. I want a website for my lab that I set up, and it might be like a history lab or an English lab where I need somebody else to handle the technical stuff for me. So we'll take care of that. So we've got a lot of stuff. There's very little consistency. Just to kind of give a quick overview of different things that we run, multi-tenant network, email, the normal stuff. Health and counseling centers, we've got athletics, telephone system, we have our own police department, including 911. In fact, our phone vendor built the 911 piece just because of us. And all that academic stuff too. So this is just the admin side, and then we fit into, like I said, all the other sciences and everything. So why even talk about heterogeneous systems? I started by saying it's not easy, but then I started thinking about it, and it's really not that hard. It's just sometimes a little bit hidden in there a little bit. But Puppet's really good at it, or at least helping you do it. In fact, there's a couple companies, if you Google Puppet and heterogeneous stuff, there's two that come up. A press release from 2011, and also Dell introduced it, and they said one reason they were buying into it for their management software was because it does really well with heterogeneous systems. So how does Puppet really help? It abstracts the differences. As James talked about earlier, it takes care of that apt-get versus yum versus whatever else based on whatever system you're on. Most things. And you can write your own providers as well. It's extensible. So if you've got some really weird system that's not supported yet, if you've got the time and the people, you can do it. There's nothing to keep you from doing it. But it can't handle all of the differences magically. You still have to be able to tell it when you need which package. It doesn't know, you don't say, I need the Apache development headers, so go. You still have to tell the package name, which it can't do everything. We're not expecting it to. Same thing for file locations, everything else. There's a lot of different things going on in there. So you have to identify the systems within Puppet before you can actually tell it, this is exactly what I need for you to do. So there's a couple different ways that Puppet's good for identifying systems. Factor is excellent. In fact, I think, well, Factor and Pyro both use Factor, at least in the sense that I'm going to talk about them. So we're just going to go through these really quickly and kind of talk about how we use each of the different ones for managing our different systems. Factor is good at telling you a lot of different things about the system. It helps you decide what you need. You could do something simple like this. That's kind of hard to read in this light. It's just a selector, set the package based on if you're in Debian, it's Apache 2. If you're in anything else, in this case, it's HTTPD. In our systems, we run Red Hat or Debian-based systems. In particular, we run a lot of Ubuntu stuff. So Factor will go through and integrates with all types of other things. Highroad can take advantage of it. We'll talk about how in just a minute. And also, too, this gets pulled into some of the other tools that James was talking about, like mCollective and everything else. If you get familiar with Factor, like James said, some of the competitors are pulling it in. So it's really a good, nice thing to use. And it's also extensible. You can add your own custom facts. If there's something else that it doesn't do, you can add that in there. Moving on to Highroad. Really wish this was easier to read. I don't know a quick way to fix it.
Yeah, can't we just change the lights?
Is there a way to, just like the front lights maybe, just the spots?
If only they had this technology where you can dim lights.
I'm gonna start touching things.
Yeah.
We should have Puppet manage the
Hit
lights.
the middle switch over there. Hit the middle button over there.
Just saying.
No.
Oh, snap.
There we go.
Look at that.
Thanks for doing that. Okay, can you guys read that a little bit better now? I know I have no idea what to expect here. So,
I can at least tell there's words.
so in this case, this is just a little snippet out of a Pyro file, and I added some other things in here just to kind of see what it might do. The different hierarchy things that we've established here are your different, in this case, they're facts. And the way Hire is going to move down this tree is it's going to try the first file, the second file, the third file, the fourth file, just moves right on down. So in our case, you can merge all of these together by saying, I want an array of if NTP servers exists in all of those different places. If it's in my actual host file, if it's in my Red Hat file, my VMware file, and whatever other custom fact, let's merge all of those together because for some reason I need all of them. The real power where we use this is in this Highroad include line. You can pull in classes from Highroad. You don't actually have to define them in your manifests. So I can say I need to pull in everything down the street. So typically we write our Highroad things from most generic at the bottom to most specific at the very top. So you start specific and we merge into more and more general. So at the very bottom, we would have something that says common. So this is the stuff that needs to be everywhere. These are our classes that need to exist on all of our systems. And then we can get more and more specific. We can say, if the OS family is Red Hat, we need this stuff on it. But if it's Debian-based, we need this stuff on it instead. And that lets us take care of some of the weird little quirks that are going on. You can also pull the very first thing that matches, and I have no idea what this room is going to be like, so I'm sorry if over here you can't see this very bottom line. All it's doing is a lookup in Highroad for the key named web server. And in this case, based on OS family and following right at the top, it'll pull in the Red Hat and you'll know that it's HTTPD. If you assign that in Highroad. Highroad doesn't magically enter these things. You still have to go in and tell them. Highroad is also extensible. It's kind of becoming a theme. One key piece that we use is eYAML. It lets us encrypt things, and there's lots of different approaches for this. There's a bunch of different things out there that lets you encrypt it. But that lets us put stuff that's in Highroad into our source control. We don't like to put passwords and things that are secrets in our source control, only because we're trying to get to that point where lots of people can edit things, but we don't necessarily want them all to be seeing our secrets. So we try and do that. We still keep it internally. We would get it publicly, obviously. Another way you can do stuff is with environments. And this is kind of a really, it's a code way of kind of showing what environments do. Just keep that in mind, it's very much an approximation. You can say if you're in the production environment, I want you to pull this set of manifests, this site.pp, this whatever. If you're in a testing environment, pull this. This is all running off of one Puppet master. So it's really kind of it's a very specific thing. You still have to write your stuff accordingly. It doesn't magically. We don't use this for differentiating between the two systems, but it, I guess theoretically would be a possible way to do it. I just want to make sure we cover everything. lastly, you can use an external data classifier. We don't really use one of these. The biggest reason for us is that we wanted everything to be kept in our source control. We didn't want to have things off in databases and other applications. We were really going for one single pot where everything that we needed would stay. But it lets you set and fetch information about your different nodes through an external script. You can declare classes, assign local variables, set environments, things like that. With the caveat, the manifests still have to know what to do after you assign a local variable. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. So after you go from having all of these different classes and Pyro, you know a lot about your system at this point. So you still have to get from variables to actually realizing resources before you can actually really do something. That requires some code. One thing we like to push is good coding. It really will save you. So this whole section could be titled good coding or things that have bitten us and caused us some headaches. So I'm just going to go through a couple of these, and most of these, we break them in different cases too. We'll talk about that at the end. We try and avoid a lot of conditionals in our manifests, only because we find ourselves that when we start out, we want to manage, say, our SSH config. So we start out with that, and we might need to make some tiny little difference between a Ubuntu system and a Red Hat system. And then, well, tomorrow I want to manage something else, and the next, and it just grows uncontrollably. We end up with these two giant, like, conditional blocks, and that just kind of gets a little bit to be a headache, really. Let's see. And realistically, if we're managing something that's really big and it all kind of fits together with a single application, we really like to have those in modules for reproducibility and other things. I say this, modules don't use Highroad. They don't use the Highroad function. That's why I put the parentheses things there. At least not now. I know there's some back and forth as to how that should work. If you're new to Puppet, just ignore it. So we don't like calling the Highroad function in our modules because it's not portable. I couldn't take my module and ship it off to somebody at another institution or another company down the road and then still be able to make good use of it without me also saying, oh, and here's how you need to set up Pyro, here's the facts that you need to put in your Pyro stuff. I can't just send them, here's a building block that you need to put in. So we try and just avoid that wherever we can. There are some kind of early attempts outside of Puppet to try and make it where you can ship some Pyro stuff with it. But like I said, if you're new to Puppet, I don't think I would go down that way unless James has got some inside something planned. I haven't read through all the bug tracker stuff in a while. And this is going to follow right along with what James said. Check the forge, don't reinvent things. If something's established, try using it. If it doesn't mean it'll work for you, but it's probably worth a try. You also have to worry a little bit about, I know a common complaint with the forge is module quality. You don't know if it's a really good module that some big company wrote and just one of their employees submitted it, or if some guy, it's the first time he ever touched Puppet, threw some stuff together and put it up on the forge. So you kind of need to look through the code, you need to evaluate it, come up with some process, even if it just works for you. There's too much going on in Puppet land to expect Puppet Labs to write a module for every possible thing that's out there. It's just too much. Otherwise, they would be essentially managing all of our systems for us anyway. So that kind of would defeat the point of most of us being here if they were just going to do it all for us. If it doesn't do what you quite need, it's close. Try forking it, making a change if you can. I know that some companies have to be more proprietary with the code. You can't just share things. I work at a university, like I said. It's really nice we can do that. And then send a pull request back. People really appreciate when you add functionality to their module, and then other people might be able to use it. Build on the work that other people have done, whatever you possibly can. And kind of keeping along that same line, don't be afraid to model your modules after other ones. The Puppet Labs, Apache, and NTP modules both support a lot of different operating systems. If you're trying to build something that needs to support a lot of different things, don't be afraid to go check those out. They're really good resources. I've modeled a couple things that we've done internally after some of those. And kind of just look at the behavior that they're doing. If you need it, you can always just take some of the structure. And then even if you don't re-implement everything, tests, all that kind of stuff, you probably still got something that's a good idea. And we'll talk about tests here in just a minute too. Write versatile modules. This is something that when you get on the forge, if you're working on a heterogeneous environment and somebody's written a module that looks awesome and they've only implemented it for Red Hat or they've only implemented it for Ubuntu, but all the blocks are there, and it's just, if only they had to set that file resource or that package resource as a variable so that I could go and edit the params file or some other place in the module, it would really save me a lot of time. So when you're writing modules, even if you only know Red Hat or you only know Ubuntu or Debian or whatever it may be, try your best to write stuff. It really helps out the community if you have any plans on making it public. So in that case, don't assume that your use case is the use case. Just kind of build it in there. Avoid giant conditional blocks where you can. Like I said, a lot of these things can't always be avoided, but they're certainly nice. It makes reading the code a lot easier when I set, this is what the Apache package is. We'll grab it here. It really helps. And this is something that I've been kind of preaching internally at William & Mary, is write everything like it's going to be open source. Even if it's within your company, it's never going to see the outside day whatsoever. By writing it like it's going to be open source, you'll save yourself some trouble. When you've got to pass it off to a coworker, they don't have to think, okay, what does this mean? What does this weird variable name mean? Everything else. It really saves everybody a lot of time, and it should help with the speed up. You might have good commenting, good documentation. So just write it all like you're going to put it out there. The last one is writing tests. This obviously isn't practical for everybody. If you come from a system administrator background, which I think most of us do, the idea of writing tests is kind of this like weird thing, like, am I going to write a test for my bash script? I mean, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Try and learn them where you can. Test little things. They've saved me several times. The spec test, checking logic. I know that I'll write a test that says, okay, that needs to do this on Red Hat and this on Debian-based OS families. So you try and run it together and see what happens. It'll catch things. It really does. So try and learn them when you can. Beaker tests are really great at testing cross-platform stuff. That's where they spin up a machine, they provision it, and it'll test it all on your system. We really like those for our modules. I'm trying to think of a really good example of where it saved me. We've rewritten our virtual hosting. We're a university, we have to run virtual hosts for all the professors' labs, everything else. Everybody wants a website. So setting up all of this hosting outside of our CMS, we've rewritten our module to manage that stuff probably 3 or 4 times in the last year. So just because we keep seeing better ways to do it, we like this way, and we're still kind of iterating over that. The Beaker tests have saved us there several times because we realized things would have broken if we didn't run the test first. So they take a little bit of extra time. Think about getting into them, especially if you're new to Puppet. Just make it part of your workflow wherever you can. And lastly, I'm sorry, one more slide for this. Way ahead of schedule, I think. Some of the other wins we've gotten from writing everything as though it's going to be heterogeneous. You have exported resources, which don't worry about too much detail, but exported resources don't care what system you're going to realize them on is. In this case, if I want to create something on our load balancer for every system, I can do something like this. Don't look at the logic of that module too closely. I kind of threw it together. And then also amplective filters. You just start getting used to, I need to run something on Debian, so I'm just going to put this OS family equals Debian. And it kind of always becomes second nature to throw things like that in there. And like I said, most of these things are all just suggestions. Having a heterogeneous environment already means you're probably doing something a little bit non-standard, a little bit different. So don't be afraid to break some of these rules. They're really just suggestions, things to keep you from shooting yourself in the foot. Our manifests and modules definitely break the rules. We also use node inheritance. Don't tell us about the Puppet. Yeah, he's shaking his head. Yeah, we use node inheritance. We're probably moving that over to Highroad. That's our plan. And there's better ways to do it. And some of it's just inherited from old ways of doing things. We started out doing this entire environment. When we started with Puppet, we knew we were going to have to run different systems. So it let us scale into multiple things a little bit better going forward. So don't be afraid to go through and we need to rip it all apart and restart it, but that takes time. We don't have time to do that. So try when you're starting out, especially for the beginners, start from the beginning, looking at every possible weird case you might run into. As one of my coworkers always says, it takes, you spend 99% of your time on 1% of the problem. It's always just how it works out. The easy use cases are just not very easy. And not everything can be handled by just changing some resource parameters. If I want to install an RPM from the web, I can, from a URL directly to that repository, Puppet will let me do that. You can't do that with Debian packages. That's just the nature of the provider. You can write RPM dash whatever and give it a URI on the command line. It knows what to do with it. Depackage, not so much. So we've got some similar kind of, there's other weirdness going on. And I kind of flew through that looking at the clock. But that's all I have. Other questions? There'll probably be a bunch of them based on how quickly I went. You can do the microphone thing.
Just a comment rather than a question.
Okay.
Environments, in the latest Puppet, environments have mutated.
Yes.
But
Very much.
what I found in transitioning is that, me personally, I found so far, I haven't completed my transition to 3.6 yet, but I can deal with most of the environment level issues within Hera rather than using the environment tree in the manifests or whatever. So, for what that's worth.
Yeah, makes sense. 3.6 solved. 3.6 fixed the environment weirdness from 3.5, by the way.
The dynamic environments.
Yes.
Two questions. One, what's the best way to separate the config from the actual modules? Like you mentioned that if you share a module, you cannot really send a chunk of
Right.
the higher data, right? So what's the, I know there's like parameterized classes and there's, the config.yaml. So what's the best practice to separate those?
What we've been doing, and this, I'm going to preface this is what we've been doing in-house and from a lot of the modules I've seen. For now, our modules, we've been using the params pp files to param subclass. They handle most of that stuff. It seems to be, right now at least, the pretty well-accepted way of handling it. Just to make things easy.
And the other question is there any decent IDE for Puppet that has Puppet support? I know there's Geppetto. Is there anything else on the market that you know of?
Not that I know of. Geppetto, and then there's a nice plugin for VI. The Vim Puppet syntax highlighting from you, it's always been good enough.
Geppetto is the only actual Puppet-specific IDE. There are a number of syntax highlighting files for all your favorite editors. I don't know why anyone would ever use anything but Vim, though. Question over here.
You mentioned that you are using RCS for your modules. How have you implemented RCS? And does Puppet Lab 3, will that support RCS in any way, shape, or form natively?
What do you mean by RCS?
Do you use a revision control system?
Yes. We use Git for everything. We keep our environments in different branches and use R10K for the deploy. That's worked out pretty well. On push, while he's getting the microphone this one, when we push, Jenkins runs some tests. Right now it's just a basically Puppet parser validate on all of our manifests, and then if everything passes, we fire that off to R10K to deploy it. And that R10K with dynamic environments works very nicely.
Since you're a learning organization in the Marriott, and you've been doing this for about 3 years, what was your strategy for getting your staff trained on Puppet?
It's interesting that you bring that up. We decided that we needed something. We had no budget. I worked in a different division previously, still at William & Mary, where we had less of a budget than we do now. I was in the library. And we needed to manage a whole bunch of systems. So I said, we need something. We grabbed Puppet and we went with it. When I got moved to the main IT group, as coworkers over here sitting can attest to, we still needed something and Puppet was already going, so we're still trying to get everybody caught up even though it's been 3 years. The online VM seemed to be working pretty well. I was kind of self-taught. Chris, do you want to yell out? What did you use?
So basically what I use is, are you all familiar with Vagrant at all? Yeah. That's what we use. I've got another colleague that I forced to learn Puppet.
Forced.
Sorry. So we have another guy, we've got two other guys in our shop basically. And they're both kind of slow.
Keep trying to do it.
on Puppet. One I forced him a couple of weeks
I
ago.
don't have much use case for it, so it's
You know,
almost
5
like
years
you're
from
all
now,
use
you're not
cases
gonna
for
have
it.
But I was being kind, so he's been doing the online training, that's working out well. And like I said, we just use Vega constantly to write our modules, because it's just perfect for doing this.
They tell me that's not fun.
Yeah, if you're just starting out, I would very much recommend it. Or even if you know what you're already doing, writing modules, it helps.
Always recommend it.
Yeah.
I guess I'll here first.
It's funny, right?
How many staff do you have dedicated to your Puppet installation, or do you do anything else besides Puppet, or are you just strictly a Puppet admin?
I do a lot more than just Puppet. I also run what's going to become our new MySQL cluster system, our web hosting, whole bunch of things. There are 4.5, 5 people in our group, and maybe total full-time equivalent, we might have 50% for Puppet. So it certainly is not our main thing, though we take certain times of the year where we can just kind of ignore other stuff and chug with Puppet. This time of year, we're a little bit more busy with everything else, just because the students are gone, it's our chance to break things and people not care.
Yeah, I've been Puppet University start a few months ago. So we run big Windows soft, so we have a couple of Windows servers. And I have two questions, like what we can do using the Puppet for the Windows server, like applying security patches or other, registry settings, like these type of things. So,
I can't speak a whole lot to Windows. I don't use Windows, even on my desktop. I don't even use a Mac, so I'm kind of useless there too. I really have Linux just on everything.
Linux.
So I can't answer that, but I do know just from reading things, there's registry management modules. Chocolatey is a package management tool for managing packages. So you can still do that package name type thing in Puppet. Beyond that, I would talk to one of the guys from Puppet.
Thanks. So I think my next question I will ask.
For those of you who weren't wildly cheering there when we said no Windows, you can do a lot of things in Windows, almost as many things as you can do in Linux with Puppet. There's a few presentations out there if you search around, just don't look at the one that I did. But yeah, registry keys, services, packages, all that stuff, and definitely check out Chocolatey if you're using Puppet and Windows. Other questions? Over.
I did, and my question was inferred.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
Heterogeneity brought up Windows, because that's.
It does, yeah.
And we are just now scratching that and wanted to see if you had.
A lot of the same stuff that you do, whether it's Ubuntu versus Debian, you just have to change what that baseline is. And the other things above that should be able to scale accordingly. So for us, it would be a big overhaul just because we set our baseline as the assumption of we're going to be running Linux something. And maybe, because we want to add in some Solaris stuff now too, and we're going to have to revisit all that.
Do you use the is virtual fact in your Highroad tree?
We haven't used the is virtual one. We have used the, I think, we haven't put that into our production stuff yet. Still kind of testing it a little bit. Because right now our virtual stuff doesn't really vary that much from our bare metal. Mainly because most of our bare metal is pre-getting into heavy virtualization days. We're a university, we move slow. So we haven't used the is virtual. I would probably prefix it. Let's go back to my Pyro page. Maybe. There we go. Preface it with something that we are just going to true down now. That'd be kind of weird. So.
Yeah, my follow-on question was going to be, I was just wondering if you had found a place to put it in your Highroad tree that makes sense, because it's kind of, it's everything.
It does. Yeah, we haven't come up with a good way to do that. That's part of the reason it's still in testing.
Could you repeat again what you used to actually kick off the Puppet run? I just didn't hear that.
We run the Puppet daemon, so it's within its ever regular 30-minute thing. We don't have anything special.
Okay. Thanks.
You had listed your ERP, which I assume because you're, had used Banner.
Yes.
How much have you done?
Absolutely
getting it
nothing.
done?
Absolutely nothing. Now, there are some other Ellucian products, the company that makes Banner, that we have automated. Some of the degree auditing software, we've gotten into a little bit with that. I think that they're going to production this week. It's scary that they let me come here today. Because it's one of the other things. But yeah, we have managed to automate some Ellucian products, but not particularly Banner yet. Mainly because they're not going to let me touch that until we've proven it with everything.
Round of applause for Phil.